was drunk. She shared the Uber drive with another person, and there were conflicting stories. The family of the girl was upset that Uber didn't help out. Who was the driver? Where was the driver? The police haven't talked to the driver. And the Riverfront Times found the driver, and our next guest wrote an article at riverfronttimes.com, which takes this story in a new direction. Danny Wizentowski, staff writer at the Riverfront Times, thanks for joining us here on the Big 550 KTRS.
Hey, great to be here.
So you found the Uber driver.
Well, he actually found me. He actually messaged me on Facebook, and that was where we did all of our communications about this story. He was very, I think, protective and worried about his own identity. I think because of how sensitive this story is, and because of his discomfort with the way the Post-Dispatch initially presented what happened in that Uber car.
Yeah, you chose to keep his name private. You call him T in the article, but he's being vilified. It sounds like, because people think he didn't do enough to stop the rape.
Well, yeah, I think that's one of the the really difficult threads in this story that I was glad to sort of unwrap and tease out. That kind of, I think, got very confused in the way it was initially reported. I think it's his those comments on that Post-Dispatch story. I think there were people who said, like, how could somebody be a driver and be driving two people around and not see something going on in the back of his car? And I think if we look at the post that he put up on July 3rd, the date of this incident, this is not a distracted driver. This was someone who was very, very aware of what was happening with the two individuals in his car, and was increasingly disturbed by that interaction. And so I think I can see why he was so kind of shocked by, I think, a lot of the reaction, because this was the thing, at least the way he communicated to me, that this was the thing that he had specifically wanted to stop.
Yeah.
This kind of question about his own behavior.
We'll get to his post and his story in a second, but you write extensively on your story about this Facebook post that he posted shortly after the incident back in July. And so whether or not we believe him or not, this is the story he posted in July before this ever gained any publicity.
You're right. And I think that's one of the main reasons that I believe he is who he says he is that this incident took place in the early morning hours, 3, 4 in the morning of July 3rd. This Facebook post is timestamped, which I checked, in the actual not just working on screenshots, and the actual Facebook group was posted that afternoon on July 3rd, unprompted, weeks before the Post-Dispatch put something up on August 5th, which was the first we've heard of this. And that very extensive post includes the route that he took. It includes, the screenshots of the responses from Uber, which are also timestamped properly. And so I think there's a pretty good corroborating evidence, and just the timing lines up and the details do as well, that this guy really was that Uber driver.
Well, and if anything, it should at least garner a conversation from either Uber and or the police department, which it seems like the police never did until this story came to light.
Yeah, I mean, that's really something, even if we put aside, I think, some of the confusing aspects of whether this assault, where this assault happened, did it happen? I think we can really see that there are some gaps in the way that Uber is communicating this kind of information to the police. I think, one thing that, kind of came out is that they really didn't know how to handle, when their technical system didn't work exactly as they wanted to, that they weren't, able to go back and maybe look at where this incident report would have existed on July 3rd that he put in. It seems that the people he was getting in touch with, the Uber reps who were saying, we're looking into this, we're coming in from other countries, and there was no real centralized way of perhaps making this a streamlined process, and where it didn't have to take 5 weeks. And so I think that's a real issue that is wrapped up in this story as well, where it doesn't seem that Uber has initiated the kind of infrastructure or communications where they could really just look back at this really quick and say, like,
right,
let's look at everything that came in on July 3rd.
Through no fault of this driver. Now let's get to what he said. He says the story that she's telling is that two guys got into the car with her. The driver's saying only one guy got into the car.
Yeah. that is a major difference in their two stories, and I don't that's it's right off the bat, and I think it does show we have someone who's trying to recount something that happened to her, and we should be sensitive to that, and we don't really know everything that happened that night, but we also have a driver who we know was sober, who I think it went into so much detail that we should give, I think, a good amount of credence to his recollections. And so that is a major discrepancy in the stories.
Danny Wiskentowski is a staff writer at the Riverfront Times, wrote a story about this Uber driver and this story that has now grown with a number of different tentacles. One of the things, Danny, that I really thought was interesting was that the Taxi Cab Commission and the traditional taxis were very quick to point out that this never would have happened in a taxi cab. And yet, if you read the Uber driver's description, he went above and beyond the call of duty, but was afraid to call the police because Uber is sort of working outside of the normal social structure because they're not approved by the Taxi Cab Commission.
Right, and I think he expressed regret, ultimately about that if this kind of thing would happen again, he would go to the police. And I think there is the aspect that Uber is in this legal gray area, but I think we should also keep in mind that this guy had witnessed a very it stopped what might have been a sexual assault, and because he stopped it, there was no what do you it can be very nerve-wracking for someone who wants to report that to the police. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know exactly what had happened. I think like I said, he expressed regret and wished he would go to the police. But I think also, the issues with his relationship to Uber and their, legal status, as well as this very, I think confusing and, difficult possible sexual assault, I think made this guy more hesitant than I think now he wishes that he had been.
If you read his blog post. And again, now the police know who this other guy is, or they're in the process of finding out who this other guy is. This other guy sounds like a real jerk, wanting to bring the girl to some hotel, trying to bully this Uber driver. And from all accounts, now I know it's his point of view, and so this is just one side of the story. But from this blog post that he wrote on Facebook right after the incidents, it seems like maybe this Uber driver really did stop a sexual assault from happening.
It does, and I think when we look at the details, they do sound as if we would hope someone in his position would act in a morally kind of courageous way, of someone who didn't just well, it's my job to drop them off wherever they want to go. This guy made a decision, and he still drove them up to the hotel, and then decided no, it's not going to happen. And I think this guy should get regardless of whether we wish he would have called the police or whether he wishes he did. If we look at that action, we think this guy was aware of what he was doing and his role, and he decided to stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's been the reaction, Danny, since you've posted this story?
I think there I think the same kind of concerns of wishing Uber would have had a better method in place for dealing with these kind of reports, of listening to a driver who really wanted to help and wanted to get this kind of stuff out there. I think also there was a lot of the concern was with the initial Post-Dispatch's reporting, which included a lot of the use of this woman and her mother's a description of the incident, of quoting from the owner or the Laclede cab president, and some of the way that story was updated. I think I think the reactions in the Uber community, a lot of are more focused. The Uber drivers, at least that I saw in that Facebook group, were very concerned about the coverage. But I think a lot of people more broadly wish there was a better line of communication between the police and Uber, and mostly on just that kind of practical level, because these are kind of things that happen late at night when people are going back from bars, and it would be great to have this to be a much more efficient and protective system for everyone involved, the drivers and passengers alike.
What's interesting about this is the taxi cab world sure is quick to stick their nose in a situation where it really doesn't need to be. And it's almost like they were trying to pile on or to take advantage of a terrible story and use that as some type of PR vehicle to promote the fact that taxis are a much better alternative than Uber.
Yeah, and I think this is the prevailing narrative that the MTC, the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission, is trying to put out, that their drivers are background checked, and Uber's resistance to fingerprinting and background checks, it exposes an essential danger to using these ride-sharing apps. I think, though, I think as more reporting comes out, and I think there's already plenty of evidence out there, is that the Taxi Cabs Commission's use of background checks and fingerprinting definitely does not preclude them from hiring cab drivers who may have criminal records, or who themselves may be a danger to their passengers. And I think when we saw the travail of at Domain and those who've been injured in taxi cab accidents, you see all these other structural problems that go very deeply into the way that that cabs are regulated and managed here.
Right.
And I think the comparison between the MTC as a well-functioned, oiled machine to this spread out Uber lawlessness is really not the model that I think most St. Louis commuters and customers are familiar with between using taxi cabs and Ubers.
There's still a lot we don't know on this. The woman, the girl, the boy, the man who was the other driver. The police have to go and investigate, and we're certainly don't want to jump to any conclusions. But it seemed like, of all the people not jumping to conclusions, the taxi cab community tried to spin this for their own benefit, which is abhorrent in that something tragic happened, and it might have backfired, because the true hero in all of this just might have been the Uber driver.
You're totally right. I think this is a lesson in not jumping to those conclusions so fast. And I think it is notable that nothing about what the driver here says or what I've written so far disproves that an assault did not happen to this woman at some point in that night. Like you said, we should wait, and we don't know what this investigation means. We don't know what happened to her at that bar, there are other people the driver mentions that he had seen, or that the person in the car had seen. There's a lot of moving pieces and people we don't really understand at this point. But I think you're right in that this is such a, I don't want to say unique, but just because the layers to this are so complicated, that really at the core we have someone who acted as a human being outside the bounds of the job required. And I think it goes to show maybe to the Taxi Commission that vilifying Uber with a broad brush has the same flaws as trying to vilify anyone with a broad brush. You may be surprised at who they really are and what it gets revealed. And I think now they'll have to deal with, we might have a really a standout guy who was driving this car who Uber went to and say, like, these are the kind of people who we want to hire and to be on the streets of St. Louis. Yeah,
this story and his blog post goes into how he drove the girl around, made sure she was sober enough and knew what was going on, and finally, after a couple hours, he's like, hey, I got to go home. The sun's coming up. And so he went above and beyond, and he did, he, in a sense, could be the hero when this whole thing is said and done. Danny Wiskentowski, is that right? Did I get that right?
Almost.
Wiskentowski. Well, you should be Irish. It'd be an easier name to say. Danny, the website is riverfronttimes.com, right?
Yep, that's right.
riverfronttimes.com, and you wrote the story. Danny, thanks for checking in, and I'm sure we'll have you on down the line. Thanks.
All right, thanks, McGraw.
You got it. The blog post goes into great detail. And again, it's just his point of view, his side of the story, but it is detailed. He talks about the guy getting in the front seat, the girl getting in the back seat, the guy wanting to be dropped off at 270 and Olive, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, let's go to a hotel. No, that's a cheap hotel. No, he finally kicks the guy out of the car. The Uber driver protects the girl. Hey, she's not leaving with you. Okay, drop me off somewhere else. Right? I mean, this guy goes into detail. Then I drove her over here. Then we drove over here. And then I got something to eat, and I drove over here. So it's a detailed account shortly after the event. Now, is that exactly how it went down? I don't know. But if you're trying to play who's telling the most truth, a sober Uber driver, we'll have to see what she says. She was pretty drunk, so we don't know exactly what she says. We don't know what she said. She was drunk, according to this. According to the original reporting, she was somewhat intoxicated. So we'll wait for the police to do what they do. If anything, you can criticize Uber for being too slow to give the information. But the police seems like they were a little slow on the uptake, too. So We got all sorts of questions on this, and this Uber driver coming out, reaching out to Riverfront Times, saying, "Hey, wait a minute! Don't yell at me. I was the one doing the right thing." So we'll wait and see what happens with all this. But the Taxi Cab Commission and whoever's giving them PR advice, it's really bad advice to start piling on. This isn't your story. Go away. But it might turn out that this Uber driver went above and beyond the call of duty and should be praised. 314-969-KTRS, 1-888-550-KTRS, or star KTRS. Those are the phone numbers. It's 926.